Well, hello everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Woodford County Cooperative Extension page for our second video of Pumpkin Week this week here in Woodford County. I'm Elizabeth Coots and I am the County Extension Agent for Family and Consumer Sciences. And I am going to be talking to you today about pumpkin. Yesterday, hopefully you tuned in to Faye's video about growing pumpkin. Well, the fun part after you've grown your pumpkins is cooking the pumpkin, bringing it into your home and preparing that and having a wonderful dish of sorts to eat after you have grown your pumpkin. So I'm just going to talk a little bit today about pumpkin in general, and then we have a recipe that I'm going to show for you. So glad that you are here. Pumpkins are in season right now. We're actually nearing pretty much the end of the pumpkin season from August to October. But of course, with Halloween and Thanksgiving coming up, that's typically when people think of pumpkin. And a lot of times you might not think of eating pumpkin other than, maybe pumpkin pie or pumpkin bread, but you can eat pumpkin, any type of pumpkin. When you are selecting your pumpkin, you want to make sure that it's very heavy for its size. Okay, this is a little 3-pound pumpkin, but it's pretty heavy. You want to make sure that you have a nice sturdy stem on the top, about 1 to 2 inches, and that it feels firm, okay? You want to make sure that the pumpkin itself is firm and heavy when you feel it, and there's no blemishes or bruises on it or anything like that. The shape of the pumpkin doesn't matter. And you can see I have a couple different pumpkins behind me, and you may have gone to a pumpkin patch. You may have seen our video yesterday when we were out in a pumpkin patch, and there are some funky shaped pumpkins for sure. The shape doesn't matter though. You just want to make sure that it's nice and heavy and firm feeling. To store a pumpkin, an uncut whole pumpkin like this, you want to leave it in a cool, dark place. So if you think of, a place maybe you would store potatoes or onions, for about 2 months. Now, if you're like a lot of people and you've cut your pumpkin to have a little face in the front and you have it outside, it's not going to last as long, of course, but a whole pumpkin can last for about 2 months. You can cube your pumpkin or your winter squash. When I say pumpkin, I really mean winter squash. There's all different kinds of pumpkin and squash that you can use with any pumpkin recipe or winter squash recipe. So if you freeze the cubed or pureed pumpkin, it'll last for about a year. And so you can use that later, of course. And I just want to show you really quick how you would cut your pumpkin open. And like I said, this is a pretty small pumpkin. To cut the top off, which is kind of, a lot of people are probably familiar with that, because if you were making a jack-o'-lantern, you would cut the top off. You would take a small paring knife, and very carefully, because there is a lot of injuries and cuts that happen when carving pumpkins and cutting pumpkins. You very carefully just take that knife down in the pumpkin, and you really have to, get some pressure down in there. I have already done it, but you would go around the stem, of course, and take that pumpkin off. But you take the top off like that. And then you would take a spoon and scrape out the insides, or you can take a knife and cut the middle of the pumpkin. And now that was really easy for me because I've already cut it. And you can open it up like this, and you see that there's all kinds of seeds in there. And of course, kids really enjoy this, scraping all of the insides out there. Whoops, and all the seeds, which are very slippery. With the seeds, though, you want to make sure to save those, because you can roast those, and we're going to have in the comments, gosh, I've got pumpkin seeds going everywhere here. We're going to have in the comments a recipe about how you can roast pumpkin seeds. And of course, we think of, again, pumpkin seeds when we're roasting them, but any winter squash seed you can roast. So look for those directions. It's very easy. You would just scrape out all the pulp, and you would rinse the seeds. Try to get as much of the pulp off as you can, but if you have a little in there, it's okay, it's edible. You would rinse the seeds, dry them, and put a little bit of olive oil in them, and then put a seasoning on them, whatever you want. Maybe a little salt, maybe you want a little cayenne pepper because you like it spicy, maybe a little cinnamon sugar to make them sweet. And then you would spread those on a baking tray in the oven at about 325 degrees. Some recipes have 350 degrees, but it doesn't really matter. for about 15 to 45 minutes. I know that's a big range, but it depends on how wet the pumpkin seeds are, and it depends on the size of the seeds as well. So definitely save those seeds. And then what you would do is, if you wanted to bake the pumpkin, after you scraped all the insides out, you would flip this over on your baking sheet, and you would roast it in the oven for about 1 to 2 hours until it's tender. And you would just take a little paring knife and just put it in the side of the squash. And if you can easily pull that knife out, then it's done. And you can cut it and eat it just like that. Now you don't want to eat the outside. You want to either peel that away or scoop the flesh out when you're going to be eating the pumpkin. So you can cube it or mash it. You can also boil it, and you would peel it and then cut it into cubes, and then you would put it in water and boil it again until a knife inserted is very tender. You can also microwave it. Again, you would peel it, you would cube it into uniform pieces and put it in a microwave bowl with a little bit of water in the bottom. And again, just until it's tender, which takes about 15 minutes in the microwave, and you might have to stir the pieces in between that time. Okay, so talking about the nutrients of pumpkin. It's very healthy. There's a lot of vitamin A in pumpkin. There's actually 122% of your daily value of vitamin A in pumpkin, which is wonderful. A half a cup of cooked pumpkin only has 25 calories. Most vegetables are low calories. 1 gram of sugar and 1 gram of protein. So what we're going to be making today is fall spiced pumpkin bread, and the recipe is going to be in the comments of this video. And there's also going to be, with the recipe, more information about pumpkin. So I hope you check that out, because we're just kind of giving an overview today. So fall spiced pumpkin bread is something that I think we all really enjoy in the fall. And anything with fall spiced pumpkin is very hot right now. So this is just a quick bread recipe. And quick bread basically means that there's no yeast in it, there's no rising process. We're just going to mix up some ingredients and put it right into the pan and bake it. Okay, so let's get into our recipe. The first ingredient is a half a cup of all-purpose flour. And I have in my bowl here the second ingredient, which is 1 1/4 cups of whole wheat flour. Okay, so we're getting a little bit more nutrients with using some whole wheat flour as opposed to all-purpose. So the all-purpose flour, though, I want to just show you how to properly measure flour, because if you don't measure flour the right way, it can make your bread dense. So if I took my half a cup here and I just scooped it in, this half a cup of flour is going to weigh more than it should. There's going to be more flour in there, and then I'll have dense bread. Nobody wants that. So I have a small scoop here in my flour bag, and I'm just going to bring up some flour, and I'm going to sprinkle it into my measuring cup here. So it's kind of fluffy, if you can kind of imagine that. Making a little bit of mess, but that's okay. And I'm going to use a flat edge to scrape the flour mostly back into the bag here. Okay, so I have my half a cup of all-purpose flour is going in with my whole wheat flour. And then I have 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder and a teaspoon of baking soda, 2 teaspoons of pumpkin pie spice. Now, if you don't have pumpkin pie spice, you can use, and we'll make sure to type this in the comment box, but you can use a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of ginger, an 1/8 teaspoon of nutmeg, and an 1/8 teaspoon of cloves. So that will make 1 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice. Now the recipe calls for 2 teaspoons, so I've doubled that, and I have all 4 of those spices in here. So that's our homemade pumpkin pie spice. And then we have a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So these are all of our dry ingredients, and I'm just going to use my whisk and mix all of that together. It already smells good with that pumpkin pie spice in it. And I'm just going to set that aside. And then I'm going to work with my wet ingredients. So the next ingredients, 1/2 cup of melted margarine or butter. I'm going to use my rubber spatula, make sure I scrape all that out of there. And then we have a 1/2 cup of sugar. and a half a cup of honey. And a trick with measuring your honey, before I measured it, I sprayed this with cooking spray, so it is a heck of a lot easier to get all of it to come out. It's not as sticky. Okay, and then we have our main ingredient here, 2 cups of pumpkin puree, okay? And of course, like I said, it doesn't have to be your traditional pumpkin. It can be any winter squash, okay? But this is just our traditional run-of-the-mill pumpkin that we're using today. And then we have a 1/3 cup of olive oil. Get that right in there, scrape it in. And I'm going to go ahead and mix this together, because that's what the recipe says. Is there a question?
We have a question.
Okay.
Can we use all regular flour?
Yes, you could use all regular flour. If you don't have whole wheat flour, you certainly can use all-purpose flour for both of those. So it would be 1 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour if that's all you have. But I would encourage you that if you're not one maybe to have whole wheat flour in your house, if that's not something that you cook with, maybe try to pick up a small bag of that and use it in a recipe like this to start, because I guarantee that you wouldn't be able to taste that there's whole wheat flour in this recipe. I know a lot of times people are, you're kind of turned off to whole wheat things because they can be a little more dense, but I would encourage you to try it. So then I have the 2 eggs in this bowl here, and the recipe doesn't say to whisk the eggs separately, but I'm just going to do that just a little bit here. I think it makes it a little easier when we mix it all together in our large bowl here. So I'm going to go ahead and put my 2 eggs in. And to add to that question that we had, you could also use all whole wheat flour if you didn't want to use the all-purpose flour. It would be a little more dense if you use all whole wheat flour, but you certainly could do that. Get a little extra nutrients with that whole wheat. Okay, so we've got our eggs stirred in here. And next, we are going to be mixing our dry ingredients into our wet ingredients. So I'm just going to pour all of the flour mixture and the dry ingredients in here. And I'm going to mix this up, and when you're making a quick bread like this, and when you're stirring it at this stage, mixing the wet and the dry, you want to not over stir it. The recipe or the directions say to just stir it until it's combined, just until you don't see any of that dry flour, any of the dry flour bits. And it takes a little bit. And sometimes you think, oh, is it ever going to get all mixed together? But it will. You just kind of have to go slow in the beginning. Make sure to scrape all around the edges, of course. It smells really good. Okay, and I see just a few more little flour bits. Okay, and that's it. So the next part of the recipe is to put it into our pan. So the recipe calls for an 8 by 4 inch loaf pan. But of course, you could do 2 smaller loaf pans. You could do muffin tins. You could do the small little mini muffin pans. I like to do those and then freeze them. Works really well. Okay, so we are going to put this in our pan here, using a rubber spatula so we can get all the. There's a little dry flour there, and just mix that in. Put this in here and kind of smooth it out. Saw another little piece there. That's okay. Just mix it in as you go. It'll be fine. Okay. And then I'm going to just kind of spread it out here in the pan, like so. And I wish that you were here to taste it. And then the last ingredient is 1/3 cup of chopped walnuts. And of course, this is optional. If there's any allergies, of course, don't use these or use a different nut that you would like. So I'm just going to sprinkle these on the top of the loaf here. And the recipe doesn't say to do this. You might realize that I don't always follow recipes. I like to add in, little tips here. I'm just going to take my hand and kind of press the nuts down into the mixture, and that way when it bakes, the nuts will kind of be baked in the top, and they won't crumble off too bad. Okay? So this would go into a 350-degree oven for 1 hour, and then after that hour is up, you would remove it from the oven, cover it with foil, put it back in the oven, and bake it at the same temperature for about 20 minutes longer. And how you know it's done is if you take a butter knife or a toothpick and you insert it in the center, and it comes out clean, and it's kind of browned on top. That's how you know it's done. And with the magic of our virtual world here, it's finished, and we have our finished product here. So this is what the bread looks like when it's finished, and you can see it's kind of risen up out of the pan, so it's a really nice size quick bread. And the nuts, you see, are stuck in the bread. They're not crumbling off there. So that is our fall spiced pumpkin bread. And like I said, the recipe will be in the comments. And if you have any other questions about anything that I've mentioned today or anything related to pumpkins and winter squash, please contact me at the Woodford County Extension Office, and I'll be glad to help you out in any way that I can. But thank you for tuning in today to learn all about cooking pumpkin. Take care.